So we are in the final stretch now. I am very excited to introduce our next speaker, Iqbal Dhaliwal, who is our fearless leader at JPAL Global, JPAL Global's executive director, who will share his remarks for our next session, Globally Informed and Locally Grounded.
Thanks very much, Vincent, and what incredible programming. Over the last day and a half, we've talked a lot about research and capacity building, so we're going to shift gears a little bit, and I'm going to not go into any more of those aspects. Instead, I'm going to talk a little bit about the organizational bit of JPAL. So coincidentally, this also happens to be the year when there are lots of birthdays happening at JPAL, not just North America's. We also have JPAL MENA, which turns 10 this year. That's our Middle East and North America office. And then our JPAL Europe office, which turned 15 this year. So I've had the privilege of crisscrossing the world, great for my miles and status on United, terrible for my ears and for my ENT. But there have been like a few questions that everybody has been asking me in whichever office I have been going. And these are questions I can't punt since I have been at JPAL for 15 of those 20 years. The first one has been, why in the world did you create this particular office? So that's number one. The second one is tougher. It's like, what has been the contribution of this office to the overall mission of JPAL? Now, I only have one kid, so I have no experience when people ask you, to compare one kid versus the other. But I have endeavored to try and answer that as well. The third one has been, what is it that's most exciting for you or for JPAL worldwide when you think about the future agenda of this office? And the last one, what in general has been the reason for the success, not just of this one particular office, but of the entire JPAL network in general. So I shall try and endeavor that. Now, you will see from the agenda that the mother office was only given 10 minutes in this 1.5 days. So the only way I can cover and answer all these 4 questions is by talking very loudly and completely not looking at this table. Because, so do not mind if I ignore you. That's the only way I can answer all those 4 questions. All right, so let's get started. So JPAL started 20 years ago with a very simple mission, that we want to fight poverty with scientific evidence. Now, what this basically means is that Abhijit, Esther, and Senthil had this vision that if you really want to have this multiplier effect of our research, you need a permanent organization. You heard Matt and others talk about this in the morning. You need an organization which can take the researchers, magnifying their work. Instead of working in one country or one sector, they can work in multiple sectors, multiple states, and all of that. So what did this all entail? Well, the first thing was just the research. So our early work focused very heavily on low and middle income countries simply because that's where poverty was very much intense. Some of the seminal work that we started was on immunization. Now, for the longest period, when I would talk about immunization around the world, people would be like, okay, we are way beyond immunization. And then COVID happens, and all of a sudden, this became really a hot topic again, but really was fundamental when we started. A second area was deworming. This was a lot of Michael Kremer's research. The first one was a lot of Abhijit and Esther's own research. And then a third area was very much around preventive pricing of health products. So, the entire gamut of education and health, but all in the context of poor countries. But not to say that at that point itself, the founders didn't realize that there is merit in working in richer countries. And that's why in 2008, the first rich country, or advanced economy office was established, and this was in France at the Paris School of Economics. And all of a sudden, the issues that we started thinking about were slightly different. It was not about like designing a social benefit program, but figuring out why people are not taking up the social benefit program. And so, it was a slight change in emphasis, but a hugely important one, and which, along with issues like behavioral economics, led to many other questions for us. Similarly, what are the returns to education? How do you make those salient to the parents in the richer countries? communities, integration now of the immigrant communities into areas like the outskirts of Paris became really, really important. And so also issues around labor market and training. So it was a really nice transformation to have JPAL Europe come on board. And then in 2013, of course, we started thinking about JPAL North America. Again, people ask what happened. Well, the first thing that happened was researchers like Larry and Amy. I still remember, like we would be like, it's a surprise that Amy hasn't started her own JPAL. And so we were very, very fortunate when Amy came to us and said, I want to start, be a part of JPAL versus being outside. So that was, I think, part one. Part two was having incredible staff, which I'll come to later, and then, of course, our donors. But let me hold off that thought on a little bit. But some of the issues here were slightly different from what we were looking at in France. So, for instance, there were many more issues around youth employment and how, we had sessions about this in the morning. Housing stability became a really, really important issue, and so also issues around food assistance. So those were some of the initial areas that JPAL North America started thinking about many years ago. And so now let me try and get to question number two. What has been the contribution of JPAL North America to the overall mission of the organization? Well, we have 1,600 evaluations. Each of those colors reflects a different sector, as you can see. Of these 1,600 evaluations, more than 10% are now from JPAL North America or are based in JPAL North America. If you look at our researchers, we have 850 researchers around the world, and out of these, 265 are doing work in North America, which is an incredibly high number. That's the progress, of course, and the growth of that. And this is my favorite slide of, who all is, like, if any of you is in this betting game of who's going to win the next Nobel Prize this year or next year, you will do far worse than picking some of the people on that slide. Just another reflection of how influential JPAL North America has been in the broader community of JPAL. Similarly, on the capacity building side, we talked, I don't have enough time to talk about the DEI work today, but one of the things where we are really trying to democratize economics and the education of economics is through these online courses. And out of the 50,000 DEDP or the MicroMasters learners, about 7,000 come from the US, and this is even before we had a domestic-focused course. And this year, we introduced a domestic-focused course, so that number is going to really, really accelerate. And overall, out of the 20,000 people we have trained worldwide on the use of randomized evaluations, more than 4,000 of those come from JPAL North America. And then, of course, the final slide, you saw this earlier, 600 million people reached. And I will say that this is the one slide that of all the earlier things I would have predicted, but this is the one that I would not have predicted 10 years ago, that 35 million people in North America would be touched by our work in just 10 years. So really, really phenomenal work. All right, question number three. Kind of what has been kind of the intersection of the work and the overall, how has the agenda overlapped with the rest of the world? So I think, again, one of the things that has been really fantastic is the cross movement of ideas from one region to the other. So again, not going to the details of it, you heard this in yesterday's session. Teaching at the right level was one of the fundamental foundational research done by JPAL worldwide. And then to see that, yesterday Kim talked about what are the common themes between that and the work which has been done in the US and by Saga, but just realizing that there are lessons to be learned from North America going to India and from India coming back to North America has been really, really heartening. Another such project has been the work which has been done by Marianne and Senthil and others on racial discrimination in the US based on, again, based on historically on race. And then see researchers apply some of those same methods on research on different angles. This was similar to the question I was asking in the morning from Marcella, but there's this study about anonymizing CVs in the US, And then there's a study by Rima and Lee, which finds that in India, the teachers give a much lower score to students coming from lower or backward castes or untouchables. And then if you just anonymize the question paper and you remove the names, because by the last name of the person in India, you can make out the caste of the person. If you take that off, then that effect disappears. And then very interestingly, they find that it's actually the discrimination is higher by people of the lower caste against the other lower caste people. So it just gives you an idea about the inherent biases which can manifest completely without people realizing it. Another really, really rich set of collaborations has been on cognitive behavioral therapy, both in Liberia as well as in the US. Researchers have been working on how CBT can help reduce crime by youth or recidivism. Really interesting to see how that body of research has evolved. And then in the last 2 years to see how the Becoming a Man program, which was piloted right here in Chicago, is now being scaled up in Western Cape through an initiative that Abhijit and I lead called the Innovations in Government Initiative. And to really see that research go from Chicago to Cape Town has been really, really an amazing experience. The other one I want to see, where's Kelly? I hope Kelly's in the room. There's Kelly. This is one of my most favorite photos because it has two of my favorite people, Barack and Kelly. In addition to everything else that North America has done in terms of research and others, it's been experimenting and innovating about what are the different ways to kind of really increase the policy impact. So I still remember vividly the day that Marianne came and met with me. I used to be the director of policy at that time, not the executive director, of, we have this really fantastic opportunity. Maya, Shankar, who's the person in the front, is at the White House, and they really need somebody to help them. They don't have even a single dollar, which for me coming from India was quite spectacular. That the richest country in the world, the most powerful person who can nuke anybody in a day, does not have money to hire one more person. But I think that there was a huge insight into that, which is when you have budgetary constraints, when you're constrained by rules and regulations, even a small little thing like providing one person who can give the right advice at the right time can have hugely massive impacts. And so I think this has been at the, so for those of you who don't know the history, Kelly was the country director for our sister organization, Innovation and Poverty Action in Ghana for many years. Somehow Marianne and I managed to convince her to come to JPAL, and I think part of that was being part of this. And she went to the Obama White House, helped advise them to create the office of, at that time it was, we would be happy if it was just a nudge unit sort of a thing. And then she went on to help create the Office of Evaluation Services. All of us were very worried that when President Obama moved, this thing would be shut down, but hats off to Kelly and her team that not only has it been there, but it has thrived. And that particular model of what we call the embedded government labs, sorry, but I created this slide when Kelly was not in the room. So I needed these boxes to point out that's Kelly. But anyway, so since then, the model which was I do want to acknowledge JPAL Latin America was also concurrently devising this Minedu labs in Peru. But both the work of JPAL Latin America and JPAL North America has been really instrumental. We now have 9 government labs, including 2 labs which we have just launched this year. You can see some of them there in US, Peru, Morocco, Egypt, Spain, France. And I just flew back from India yesterday after launching our first air and water labs, which is embedded in the government of, going to be embedded with 5 state governments in India. So really hats off to JPAL North America for this work. Okay, my third question, which is, what are we most excited about in terms of the overlapping areas of interest? I'm going to go over this really fast, but really areas around artificial intelligence and future of work are areas where we are collaborating very closely. Vincent and I, in particular, are super excited about artificial intelligence. At our own event in November, we are putting together a really nice panel to think about how is AI going to be a force of good or evil? How can JPAL researchers do a lot of evaluations to get the answer to how can we maximize the positive and minimize the negative impacts of that. There's been lots of these methodological things like I mentioned about, including use of administrative data for faster RCTs which are more representative of the underlying data. The Science for Progress initiative is really doing wonderful things about democratizing the availability of scientific funds, the ESG, environmental and social governance work, the science of scaling, and education and training. And then finally, I do again want to acknowledge that JPAL North America has been really at the forefront of helping JPAL think about our diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Again, when they first brought this up many years ago, we were like, what is this? What is JPAL's role? But everything from, you heard Matt talk about the invited researcher selection committee, which Marianne Bertrand, who was here yesterday, chairs. And really, I again don't have the time to show you, but if I can, if you can imagine the demographics of our affiliates and the demographics of our invited researchers, in terms of gender, but also in terms of their race, in terms of what are their home countries, it's a fairly tectonic shift. And given that the invited researchers are the future pipeline of affiliates, I think the whole composition of our affiliate network is going to look very, very different 10 years from now. The economic transformation program that JPAL North America has been at the forefront of has been really, really fantastic. Okay, final question. What makes it all happen? Who are the people to thank? I think the first is the researchers. We hear a lot about researcher constraints, but let me tell you, like a lot of people think that people do RCTs because it's the easy thing to do. Marcella very self-deprecatingly said, this is an RCT, everything can be summarized into bar graphs. But let me assure you, setting up, designing an RCT, implementing an RCT is far, far tougher. I'm not, than just sitting in the office, downloading lots of administrative data and just running a bunch of regressions on it. The reason I can say that is because that's what my wife does a lot of. So I know that I will not be blamed for kind of being biased in one direction. But really, at the core of this is, folks like Larry and Matt and Amy who could have gone the easy way out and in fact are taking the harder route. The implementing partners, all of you, Marianne said this perfectly, as she does most of the time, much better than I can. Most of these government organizations didn't have to do that. Same way you heard Laura say it in the morning. The doctor in Camden didn't have to, evaluate his program, but they decide to evaluate not because it's the easy thing to do, but because it's the right thing to do. And so we would not be here without our implementing partners. Our host universities, once again, somebody talked about the institutional mechanisms. MIT has been really at the heart of who we are. There are constraints to working in an academic environment, but it's really been important for us to have these host universities. Our program participants are really our unsung heroes. They open up their lives to us. They open up their houses to us. They spend hours and hours doing a survey. Think about how many times we get these pop-up surveys and how many times do we really even answer them, right? Like even after you buy something, even after you hate something, we still 90% of the time just close the survey, which would take us exactly 10 seconds. We don't give feedback. And these are the folks who invite us to their houses, sit with us sometimes for 3 or 4 hours answering these questions. And many times they don't end up in rooms and conferences like these, but they are the reasons why JPAL is where it is. Our staff is really at the core of it. I wish I could blow the slide up and put 20 faces, but I just put a few. Marianne has been core to this. Laura and Vincent have been the most amazing colleagues to work with and who have taken JPAL to newer heights. But I also want to call out Liz. Where's Liz? There's Liz and the entire F&O team. You only see the researchers, you only see the policymakers, but it's the finance and operations teams, the folks who run the finances, the sub-awards, the designers, the comm people, our executive assistants. All of them come together to really make this happen, and really, really hats off to them. Our donors, if Arnold Ventures hadn't come in at the way they came in, the direction of JPAL could have been very, very different. Sloan Foundation, we just put a few names on there, but really, again, they could have taken the easy way out rather than taking this long view. Our surveyors, our enumerators, really spend hours and hours getting on the field, getting the data. Could not be there without them. And finally, the civil society, the journalists, everybody who demands that policies be better and be based on evidence rather than instincts, ideology, and inertia. So to all the stakeholders, I want to say a huge thank you for JPAL North America at 10, JPAL at 20, and look forward to the next 10 years with you. Thank you so much.